In 1868, the Tata Group was founded on a philosophy that put the community at the heart of its existence. Today, we are $100 billion global enterprise. Our today has been built on enduring values. Today is about delivering excellence across business sectors. Is about building a future-ready nation. Our today has a strong foundation with community at its core. Our today is dedicated to the communities we serve. Today is always about more than just today. Our today is a continuous journey for a better tomorrow. Tata, leadership with trust.
Paridhi, can you hear me?
Hi, Shishir.
Hi, Saurav. Oh, good. I just sent a message to Paridhi. Hi, Shrikar. How are you?
Hello, sir. Good to see you, sir.
Wonderful to see you. We've been missing you in Geneva. It's been a long time since you were here. So we need to get you back quickly.
It is more than 3 years.
I know, Shrikar. Saurav, nice to connect. Where are you based at the moment, Saurav?
As of now, I'm based in Delhi,
Okay.
But because of COVID, mostly, our travel has been restricted. But usually I shuffle from Dubai and Singapore. Most of my time I spend there because I take care of the entire industrial consulting practice for CBRE. And we work a lot across Africa, actually. So interesting to meet you. We must connect later on with you.
Absolutely. A pleasure. And Buhani, how are you and where are you connecting from?
I'm good, and how are you? It's good to be talking to you. I hope you can hear me. I'm connecting from Johannesburg this afternoon.
Excellent.
I'm just trying to set myself up so I'm at the correct level. Give me a few minutes.
No, you take your time. Meanwhile, I can welcome Albert onto the panel. Albert, warm welcome.
Thank you so much, sir. How are you doing?
We're good. We've got a big fisheries ministerial coming up in 2 days' time. Since we haven't yet become public in this forum, like for many years, it happens in WTO, we build up expectations to a far greater level than what we can deliver. So it's invariably that. I think we are headed in that direction.
You should under-promise and over-deliver is probably what you're trying to do now, right?
Often that is what, I don't know whether it's advertently or inadvertently. Listen, but we have a few minutes. So Shrikar, we'll obviously start with your special address. But anything you'd like to kind of share with the other panelists on what you'll be focusing on so that they can either use that as a context or perhaps just so that, I think each different speaker can focus a bit. But, those of you who don't know Shrikar, I mean, he's got this amazing experience which few foreign service people have of both bilateral and multilateral of both the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. So I think it's great that we are starting with you, Shrikar. So over to you. Anything you want to kind of share with?
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon to good evening to all my fellow panelists. Sir, I'll be briefly touching upon all the points enumerated there, sir. Okay. Like what are the products where there is a scope of increasing the trade from both sides, and also like both in goods and services, and also like whether India can enter into FTA with the African Free Trade Area. So, and also some of my thoughts for reaching the target of 150 billion. So I'll be briefly touching upon almost all the points.
Perfect. So that's great. But just so that you know that I'll probably set the tone just in a more global way. A few aspects about the African Continental Free Trade Area, of how, been experienced with some of the other areas and the possibilities that opens up. And obviously, all of you can then get into the specifics. I think after Shrikar, Albert, we'll probably give you the floor. Was that all right?
That's correct.
Okay. So I know, and your perspective is both the bank and the regional perspective. So happy to hear what you'd be focusing on.
Very good. So it's good that you're setting the stage with details on the Continental Free Trade Area arrangement, because I'm basically get into some statistics about the relationship between India and Africa, and I think give some macro numbers on export and imports from both Africa and India. Then I will be arguing that to seize this opportunity of the Continental Free Trade Area to boost trade and really increase welfare, we need to do three things. One is going to be investing in a better understanding of the mega trends that are shaping the continent. And those mega trends would have to include the long-lasting scars of COVID-19. Second would be demography. third mega trend would be the digital revolution. Fourth being climate change. And the fifth being the fact that despite all those challenges, Africa is still home to some of the fastest growing economies in the world. And that's, to me, a very important fact to actually build in the way we build in the way we arrive at investment decisions. So that's going to be the second quick point is going to be
I can only put one on.
have the long view and
look at it to reduce the heat.
Can someone just put yourself on silent? Probably the person Andita. Anyway, Albert, that's great. My only positive worry would be that we have only about, I think, around 7-8 minutes or so. As long as we can fit in these very useful and important points within that time, that'll be hugely be appreciated. That'll be phenomenal. So great. Bohani, I think the program shows you coming next. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. I think since my fellow panelists would have spoken on the numbers around the free trade area and the benefits of the free trade area, what I can focus on, or what I will focus on, is how corporates can essentially benefit from the free trade areas, and maybe in that process address what some of their concerns are and how those concerns are being dealt with. And maybe then I think I have, if I understand, about at most 8 minutes, right? So I think I will connect it based on the first two speakers, but my focus will be precisely on how Indian corporates can benefit out of the free trade area.
That'll be phenomenally useful. I mean, a point that I will probably say at some point, or I may not need to say it now that you're saying it, is how, at least that's the feedback we have, that how much more the involvement of the private sector can be enhanced, because somehow it seemed to have been missing in the conceptual stage at the AfCFTA, and maybe now it can come in. So that's great. That's great. I think you have
coming after Bohani.
Perfect. And you've also been very kind to send that email, which was great, as to what more can be done to enhance it. But yeah, please go ahead. You want to elaborate on what you said?
No, see, our experience has been very on ground. We've been helping developers, governments, advising them on developing large industrial zones, free zones, economic corridors across Africa. We work with Sembcorp, Mitsubishi, Marubeni, Mahindra, DP World, etc., across most of their large industrial infrastructure products. And I want to focus, while a lot of the other panelists are focusing on policy issues, on free trade areas, I want to focus on ground measures, which really will have to be developed under the AfCFTA framework if we really have to see AfCFTA becoming successful. Things like, bringing in international infrastructure developers for the development of zones, the question of, funding, how that comes through for such large zones. Which sectors does one choose from an Indian manufacturing perspective, which really gives them success in the African market? Which location do you move to really, whether you move to a west or an east or a south? Those are things which are, key decision-making factors. And also the question is about connectivity and logistics, because roads and railways are not an option sometimes in Africa. So ports have to be beachheads in terms of development of those large areas of trade and manufacturing. So I'm going to talk about those 4 or 5 key points, which repeatedly, Shishir, we have seen private manufacturers look at for success. And I'll end with a small example of a company whom we've been working with called Tolaram. Essentially, how how they have actually been very successful in developing a food business, and they were from Singapore, and how some of their learnings can be looked at from an India manufacturing perspective. So broadly, I'll take about 8-10 minutes and focus on these.
That's genuinely fantastic. I mean, genuinely, trust me, I'm not saying it for the sake of saying it. What all of you've said is complimentary. Even without us having had a chance to coordinate prior to this, there's very little duplication. And sometimes there's absolutely no harm if good things are duplicated. It helps us get things from short-term memory to the long-term memory. So phenomenally. Actually, what you've said helps me also, because I had some figures about the export-import profiles, which since Shrikar is covering, I will take away from my opening remarks. I also had some broad figures about billions of dollars of trade up and down a bit, but I think Albert's doing that, so I'll happily remove that too. So good. So we're on track. We've just waiting. Well, I think I did see Sachin, who's logged in. So that's one of our speakers, and I think Sachin, such a pleasure. We would have been, well, never can be complete without you. Never can be complete without you. So delighted that Sachin, you are here. Sachin, we were just going over what each of us would briefly be talking. I think you may have heard at least the last one or two people. So there's a bit of focus, obviously, a bank perspective that Albert will give. Shrikar is obviously giving this special address right at the beginning. The private sector bit comes in. So I think we're on track. So if you want to just very briefly share with the other panelists the thrust of your intervention, I think then just shortly after that, we are good to go.
Excellent. I have just 3 points, Ms. Priyadarshi. One is very much about the huge financial cost that is there. So how our banking and finance can connect and how we can reduce the transaction costs. And we have been interacting, and in the RBI board, we have been discussing how we facilitate and try to give little more support to our banking architecture and provide support in terms of financing. So that's one portion that I'm trying to cover. Second, I think Saurabh was mentioning about the trade facilitation, and he mentioned about ports, and I think that's the second point that I want to cover in terms of how trade facilitating measures are extremely important for us to go forward with. And third is about the institutional compatibilities, particularly when I was working on the seed sector, the issues related to sanitary and phytosanitary measures, technical barriers to trade, SPS, TBT convergences are extremely important, agriculture products being the one.
This is Saugat from CII. Welcome all of you, sir. I think we can start the session.
Saugat, perfectly fine. Thank you so much for that. I think it's given the panelists a bit of time to exchange views and thoughts, which is always very important. It's also given me time to just quickly run over the people who've logged in, and some of them are not only friends, but who I would say are genuine experts, I'm sure more than me, at least in this area. So warm welcome to them. So let's start. Look, a very good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are, to this, what I think is the second plenary session of this, I think the 16th, is it? The CII Exim Bank Conclave. Yes, quick introduction. My name is Shishir Priyadarshi. I'm at the WTO, long years, forgotten how long. Largely been working in the development dimension, which therefore Africa and the continent is very much a focus of my work. I have the pleasure of moderating this. And as I've just been introduced to the panelists, you are in for a very diverse set of panel members. Now, as has been mentioned in the flyer that accompanied this event, this is largely to look at the possibility and scope of India having a free trade agreement, obviously in the context of the African Continental Free Trade Area, which from now on we'll try and refer to as only the AfCFTA. And in that context, the session will explore how increased opportunities for trade in goods and services that the AfCFTA would create could be leveraged for mutual and sustainable benefits to both sides. Truthfully, if it's got to be mutual, only then can it be sustainable. And clearly the measures that would need to be taken across, the multifaceted stakeholders, very importantly, the private sector, and we'll be hearing about that too. Now, I would also request my panelists to keep looking at some of the questions which have already started coming in, which actually impresses me a great deal. But just to lay the background, obviously the AfCFTA was signed off about a year and a half, close to 2 years ago. But the implementation, as Gurjeet was asking in the chat box, started on the 1st of January 2021. And yet it has started, but it's a long way off from what would be the final, the final set of your tariffs, border and non-border measures that would finally be in place. But it's definitely opened up a new and a very important chapter in Africa's efforts towards regional integration, which, at least we at the global level, we hope would support the promotion of industrial development, economic diversification, and very importantly, a significant expansion of intra-regional trade. Because it does always seem odd that so much of Africa is trading so much outside rather than within itself. And I think this, this potential that will be unlocked of a single market will have both substantive benefits, because so far what you could have small businesses who may feel, or medium-sized businesses who may feel that the market's not big enough, will suddenly have access to a much, much larger, domestic market. But very importantly, in the context of the WTO, when you have a market of that size, a unified markets, your negotiating powers in the context of, different issues that you negotiate here goes up phenomenally. And I think also the fact that a large number of landlocked countries are in Africa. In the WTO, we have this group of the LLDCs, the landlocked developing countries, and a very large number of them are from Africa. And I think for them, after the signing off of the trade facilitation agreement, this would probably be the biggest beneficiary. But as some of the panelists will be telling you, this will only happen provided a number of boxes are ticked. Providing of financial assistance, fiscal packages, because you will need trade-related infrastructure, you will need a supply-side capacity, you will need assistance for harmonization of standards. So there would be a lot of boxes which will have to be ticked before we can see the full implementation of the AfCFTA, and consequent to the full implementation, the benefit which we hope would accrue to both India and Africa. Very importantly, I think it'll be very important to ensure multi-stakeholder collaboration, and obviously the private sector will be the most important element of that, and we have a panelist who will be talking about that. And it is really very important, I've seen, that if the importance of the message that is communicated is, it's not just the opportunities which businesses must encash on, but be prepared. The coming into being of a regional, one continent also opens opportunities for others, which are challenges for you. And they will always go hand in hand. So better prepared for both opportunities and challenges. And therefore, the private sector will also have to be geared up, invest in technology, invest in logistics, capacity building, all with the objective of becoming more and more competitive. I won't go into the figures because we have one of the panelists will be touching upon them, or more than one. But one thing I can say, simply because I've attended, I think maybe out of these 16 CII Exim Bank conclaves, I probably have attended about 10, that whether because of the impetus that these kinds of summit provides or otherwise, the trade between India and Africa has definitely gone up. There have been occasional dips where, peaks reached earlier have become troughs, but overall, I think the graph is very much positive. And I think this reflects the importance that both sides give to bilateral trade. And I think with the coming in force of the AfCFTA, this bilateral trade will only increase because not only will India have access to a larger, unified, and I'm very positive, a very robust African market, it will also allow, and that I think will be a key point of any FTA that is discussed. The FTA will allow Indian businesses or Indian industry, provided they get in with FDI and comply with the rules of origin requirements, to also benefit from the preferences that Africa at present gets, but very often preferences that are not fully utilized. And I think that's really the key, to look at those preferences which are not being utilized if you're looking for investment. So clearly, the AfCFTA, and I conclude with those remarks, is a game changer, or will be a game changer as far as India-Africa trade is concerned. But the game change will occur only provided we ensure that a lot of complementary policies and a lot of complementary assistance is provided. It's also as important that the private and public partnership goes hand in hand. And above all, it's important that there must be mutuality of benefits, because only then will all these benefits be sustainable. So I think I've tried to touch on perhaps a lot of the points that the panelists would be expanding on. But I think I will now move on to the next part of this session, or actually the real part of the session, by introducing you to Dr. Shrikar Reddy. He is a very senior Foreign Service officer who's dealt with in various capacities with Africa, in particular West Africa, North Africa, West Asia too. So he has a huge amount of experience in the foreign ministry, but also an equally valuable experience in the Ministry of Trade and Commerce. And he's here to kickstart the session by his special address. So Shrikar, pleasure to see you. We've missed seeing you in Geneva, but now I look forward to listening to you. So over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Excellencies, esteemed panelists, distinguished guests, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good evening to participants from India and good afternoon to participants from Africa. It is indeed a great pleasure to participate in this plenary session on aligning India-Africa bilateral trade with the African Continental FTA. So I would like to thank CAA for giving me this opportunity to address the distinguished participants today. So as you're aware, India and Africa are connected by ancient maritime links and common struggle against colonialism and apartheid. This historical association has over the years blossomed into multifaceted partnership with emphasis on economic cooperation and development partnership. Prime Minister Modi has made Africa a top priority for India's foreign and economic policy, and there has been a qualitative shift in our long-standing ties. Even during the COVID-19 pandemic, India has also stood in solidarity with Africa and has gifted over 150 tons of medical aid to 25 African countries. Under the Vaccine Maitri initiative, we have also supplied 24.7 million doses of Made in India COVID vaccines as grants, commercial and COVAX supplies to 42 countries in Africa. India and Africa are also working together at the WTO to ensure quick and affordable access to COVID-19 vaccines and medicines for people living in developing countries and least developed countries. The TRIPS waiver proposal of India and South Africa is now supported by over 120 countries and hope it will be adopted at the WTO quickly. Coming to the bilateral trade between Africa and India, from around $7 billion in 2001, it has increased to 78 billion in 2014, before moderating to about $66.7 billion in 2019-20, reflecting a commodity price decline. Exports from India to Africa in 2019-20 were valued at $29 billion, which is about 5.4% of the total imports of Africa. And imports from Africa amounted $37.7 billion, which is about 8% of total Indian imports. Among the African countries, Nigeria is the largest trading partner of India with a total trade of $13.82 billion and with a share of 20.72% the total trade with Africa. This is followed by South Africa with a total trade of over 11 billion, which is also close to 17% of the total trade. Nigeria, South Africa, Egypt, Angola, Mozambique, Kenya, Tanzania, and Ghana. So these 7 countries have a combined share of about 66% of the total India's trade with Africa. So some of the important items of exports to Africa recently include petroleum products, engineering goods, especially motor vehicles, iron and steel, pharmaceutical products, machinery and equipment, cereals, electrical machinery, plastics and articles. If we see from the African side, India is mainly importing mineral fuels, mineral oils, and also natural and cultural pearls, precious and semi-precious stones, inorganic chemicals, edible fruits and nuts, ores, slags, and ash. As per the 2018 joint study conducted by the Exim Bank of India and the African Exim Bank, there is a significant potential for expanding trade between India and Africa. So therefore, there is a further need for deepening and strengthening of trade ties between India and Africa through geographical diversification and also expansion of trade basket. So I'll briefly present 6 of my thoughts on how we can double our current trade to reach the 150 billion from the current around 70 billion. So first, I think the Indian missions in Africa and the African missions in India have to play a key role in facilitating market access to the businesses from both sides, especially the MSMEs. And in this regard, the government of India has also taken a decision to set up 18 new missions in Africa, taking the total missions to 47. Out of the 18 new missions, already 9 are already operational. And also, I take this opportunity to appreciate the Indian missions for their proactive role, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, in supporting Indian export promotion councils and trade and industry associations in organizing a lot of online B2B events, webinars, exhibitions, etc. And our missions in Africa have also identified certain products which have export opportunities in Africa, for example, iron and steel, agricultural machinery, tractors, automobiles, two-wheelers, auto components, and medical devices, pharmaceutical products, chemicals, petroleum products, ready-made garments, agricultural leather products. The second point is, we can increase the trade by increasing investment in Africa. So while the export items from Africa into India are serving the Indian market well, but if the Africa can improve its manufacturing capabilities and produce more value-added products, I think it can also help the overall trade between India and Africa. Already India companies have made significant investments in Africa. So far, the cumulative investment is over $64 billion in many sectors. But the entry into force of the African Continental FTA from 1st of January this year, so with a unified market of over 1.3 billion people and a combined GDP of over 3.4 billion, I think this will offer vast opportunities for the Indian private sector to invest in Africa and to become part of the African regional value chains and also the integration of the African industries in the global value chain, especially in sectors such as agro-processing, oil and gas, mining, power, pharmaceuticals, leather and footwear, textiles, and automotive components. So Indian investments will also increase trade, so because Indian companies can supply input materials and intermediate goods. And also the finished products can also be again sent back to India for selling in the Indian market. Just to give you an example, Indian companies could help Africa's agriculture sector, including farm mechanization, agro-processing, and storage. So Africa can become a reliable supplier of finished agricultural products, for example, pulses where there is a shortfall in India. Thirdly, I'll come to the need for concluding preferential trading agreements and the FTAs between India and Africa. So here I'm happy to inform that India has signed the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation and Partnership Agreement (CECPA) with Mauritius, which is the first trade agreement of India with any country in Africa. So this agreement was signed on 22nd February this year, and it entered into force from 1st April 2021. Also, I'm happy to inform that India and the 5-member Southern African Customs Union, SACU, which is the oldest customs union, have also revived the preferential trade agreement talks recently, and we are hopeful that we'll be able to conclude the agreement quite quickly. And here I would like to mention that India is also willing to engage with other African countries or regional economic communities, such as COMOSA, SADC, ECOWAS, and enter into either preferential or free trade agreements for mutual benefit. There was a question regarding whether India would be willing to enter a separate FTA with the African Continental Free Trade Area. So I think as this free trade area is at a very nascent stage of implementation, at this stage we will wish the successful implementation of this agreement, which will lead to an inclusive and sustainable development of Africa. I would like to mention that given the historical connection and traditional solidarity between India and Africa, whenever the Africa Union takes a decision regarding negotiating separate FTAs between African Continental Free Trade Area and other countries, India would like to be the first country to engage with the African Union for a separate FTA with the AfCFTA. Fourth, I'll come to the effective implementation of the India's non-reciprocal duty-free, quota-free market access for LDC for African LDCs is important. So as you're aware, in the spirit of the South-South cooperation, India was the first developing country to provide this duty-free, quota-free market access to the LDCs in 2008. So there are, out of 33 LDCs in Africa, 26 have already become beneficiaries and now are getting market access of duty-free, quota-free up to 98% of the Indian tariff lines. So out of the 7 remaining LDCs, recently we have received a letter of intent from Sierra Leone to become beneficiary, which we will be notifying shortly. So I take this opportunity also to request other remaining 6 LDCs, Angola, DRC, Djibouti, Mauritania, Sao Tome and Principe, and South Sudan, to become beneficiary of this scheme so that it can also impact in increasing exports from these countries into India. Fifth, I think the effective utilization of the lines of credit extended by the government of India through Exim Bank to a number of institutions in Africa for development of infrastructure, agriculture, energy is also vital. And also, there are some schemes from the Indian Exim Bank, which is a buyer's credit scheme. This should be popularized among the importers in Africa so that more trade can happen between two countries. And sixth, we should also work toward reducing the transaction costs. I think Dr. Sachin Chaturvedi will be dealing more about this. So the Indian Export Credit Guarantee Corporation is also working to reduce the cost of insurance for export to African countries. So with regard to trade in services, there are huge opportunities for the India-Africa cooperation in the services sector. Indian companies can invest in service sectors in Africa in which India has a comparative advantage, such as information and communication technologies, telecommunications, education, tourism, healthcare, banking, and financial services. I think tourism holds immense potential for increasing Africa services exports to India. So just to give the figures, in 2019, the number of Indian outbound tourists was close to 27 million, out of which only 662,000 Indian outbound tourists went to Africa. So which is less than 2.5% of the total Indian outbound tourists. So there is a significant potential for increasing Indian tourists to Africa. And I think Africa should do a lot of tourism promotion to make Africa a favorable tourist destination for Indian outbound tourists. Also, the LDC in Africa could also benefit by increasing the service exports to India by availing benefits under the India's services waiver for LDCs, which includes preferential market access, waiving visa fees for all LDC applicants applying for business and employment visas, and technical assistance and capacity building. Also, in the services sector, India started a project called E-Vidya Bharati and E-Arogya Bharati for cooperation in the health and education sector, which aims to provide tele-education and telemedicine services, thereby putting India's knowledge and technical expertise at the service of the African countries. So I conclude with this remark by appreciating the efforts of CAI in organizing this event, with sessions covering various aspects of partnership between India and Africa. I hope that the deliberations in various sessions of this well-organized event will have a significant impact in strengthening the India-Africa partnership, which is based on the philosophy of shared destiny and South-South cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, Shrikar. Thank you very much. I think for setting the tone and setting the stage. There are many takeaways, and I think a lot of us have listened very carefully to what you've said, because it's the government speaking. So even if it's quasi formal, there is still a element of formality. So thank you for that, and I'm really happy to hear about the strong interest, is what I would term it, in initiating an FTA at the first opportunity. My only experience of some other places is that the earlier you start, the more of a front runner advantage you get, and I think it'll be good for both sides if that's done quickly. What's also very important, which you mentioned, is that in spite of a fairly large value of trade, it's still concentrated between the continent and India, still concentrated in a few countries and few products. So huge opportunity of growth. So thanks a ton. Thanks a ton. I have the pleasure of now both giving the floor and introducing Albert to you. Albert is the chief economist for the African region in the World Bank. That's, and I know a few chief economists, that's a position of extreme, importance and responsibility. Albert and I joined our respective organizations the same year, 1997, except I stayed on in Geneva all these 25 years and he's been all over the world. But that's probably reflective of his immense experience, and I think we'll really benefit from your intervention, Albert. So wonderful to hand the floor over to you. Take care.
Thank you very, very much, Chair, and Your Excellencies, honorable panelists and guests. It's an immense privilege for me to speak to you today. And I just want to add to what the chair said, that in my career, in fact, 10 years of my career have been spent working on and living in Asia. So I come to this conference really bringing that joint perspective from Africa, but also from living and working in Asian countries, hopefully bringing this together. And it's the spirit of this conference to which I'm really honored to be invited. I thank here the Confederation of Indian Industry and the Exim Bank for inviting me. Let me first say that the link between Africa and India predates nation states. Traders, travelers, and city-states have been trading in goods and services and culture along the Indian Ocean coastal lines of Africa for centuries. So, the link is also favored by geography. You know, there's only a slit of Indian Ocean separating Africa from India. And this has served us well in the sense that in the past 20 years, we have seen trade between Africa and India really growing extremely fast. And India has now become the third largest trading partner for Africa, both by export destination and source of import after EU and China. India is the largest export destination by value for the largest country in Africa, Nigeria. The trade and investment flow between India and Africa have been on an upward trend, and this was actually not anticipated 20 years ago, which is a great development. It's a good change. Those numbers certainly have been affected by the global pandemic, global pandemic, but they are still significant. Africa's export to India was close to $25 billion, in 2020, and a significant share of the export are fuel and other raw materials, while African import from India are largely capital and consumer goods, mainly refined petroleum and pharmaceuticals. So Africa clearly exports mainly, crude oil. And actually you see that in the top 10 exporters from Africa, they are all heavily dependent on natural resources and exporting crude oil to India and also other agricultural products as well. So the opportunity is huge from my perspective, and the Africa Continental Free Trade Area coming into force will only amplify and widen those opportunities. Completely agree with the chair that this is a real opportunity to seize and harness. Now, at the World Bank, we have fully supported the enacting, but also we're supporting implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. We're working with the Secretariat, which is based in Accra, and we have been doing studies to further understand the potential of this agreement. And from our recent study, it's quite clear that this agreement will create the largest free trade area in the world, measured by the number of countries participating, 55. The pact connects 1.3 billion people across those 55 countries with a combined GDP of around $3.4 trillion. It has a potential not only to boost incomes, but also to lift 30 million people out of extreme poverty from our recent simulations. Full implementation of this agreement would clearly lead to income gains from, that could increase by 7% by 2035, or nearly $450 billion. So that's the size of the delta. And on the distributional side, this implementation of this agreement would lift roughly 30 million people out of extreme poverty, but also 68 million people from moderate poverty. So this is actually quite important at the time where COVID-19 has hit the continent and led to eradicate, of basically erasing 10 years of progress that were made in terms of poverty reduction. COVID is threatening to really roll back those progress, and the continental free trade is actually coming at the right time as a real opportunity to really diversify African economies, attract FDI, investment, and job creation on the continent. Let me now, opine that to fully seize this opportunity and fully harness this great opportunity, the business community in India and Africa and our governments need to do three things. The first is to really, fully understand the megatrends that are driving Africa's future and factor this in their investment decisions and policies, because a lot of policy changes will be needed, as the chair mentioned earlier. The second thing that must be done is that we all need to take or to have a long view and look beyond the trade balance to focus on investment and growth, the job creation in Africa as the objective. The third thing that I believe is going to be crucial is going to be to together agree on the right metrics to measure our success. Because even if we were to reach an agreement for a free trade agreement between India and continental Africa, we will still not make progress until we define precisely what are the targets, what are the real metrics for success. Is success just boosting trade, or should it actually include investment levels, job created, or should it actually be approached in terms of mutually beneficiary exchanges? So those are some of the thought I have, but let me probably elaborate a little bit more on the first point, on the first condition that I see, because it's really important. Megatrends are driving 50-year horizon, and as a macroeconomist, I definitely need to give you that long view. What is driving African economies from my perspectives are, one, the long-lasting scar of COVID that would affect our economies in the next decade or so, and we need to actually be aware of that. This pandemic not only has created a recession, but is also, has threatened the industrial fabric in a number of countries, has weakened, trade and investment. Investment is in decline in Africa, and we need to approach the issue of really boosting trade from that perspective. COVID has left a long-lasting scar, and we're still actually working through how to recover from COVID in our countries. So that's extremely important. Implications of COVID for trade and investment, we have seen them. They are expressed in terms of a rejiggling of global supply chains that are now leading to more push for investment on the continent, as the disruption in supply chains have definitely caused a lot of harm to countries that were completely dependent on trade. So the second thing I would like to say is demography is another key trend. By 2050, Africa would have the largest workforce on earth. Africa has the most youthful population on earth. And it is important, as we take our investment decision, to have that in mind and not just focus on the poverty levels of today, but thinking of what would happen in the next 50 years. In the next 50 years, with a combination of youth and digital, Africa will be playing a completely different role in the global economy. And those who would not have anticipated that mega trend would miss out. Which takes me to the point on digital. What we have noticed with COVID in Africa is phenomenal. The digital has been a silver lining during COVID, and Africa has not wasted this crisis. Digital is positioning to drive the future of work in Africa, and firms need to take this into their calculations because firms are not only increasing their connectivity to digital tools in Africa, more people are using e-commerce, and the use of digital platform was the highest in countries like Togo and South Africa. And firms are actually hiring more. Firms that are connected to the digital are hiring more people, not less, which is actually a very different future of African economies. Digitalization is not displacing work. To the contrary, it's leading to more employment. These are facts from studies my office has just completed, and we need to really build this in our assessment. Climate change is another important trend. Some see it as a constraint. I see it as an opportunity for green goods to be manufactured in Africa, an opportunity for those solar panels to be made in Africa, an opportunity for really greening our recovery. And a number of African countries are already seizing those opportunities, and Africa is still home to some of the fastest growing economies in the world. So let me stop here for now, but I'll probably just conclude with an African proverb which says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, you have to go in groups. You have to go together. Bring some friends along. And, my sense is, we need to really collaborate, work with IFC, which is the private arm of the World Bank Group, create those joint venture with the domestic private firm, make sure we look beyond the trade balance, focus on investment, focus on job creation, because at the end of the day, there will be no sustainable exchange, no sustainable trade if there is no growth and job creation in Africa. Thank you.
Albert, thank you. I didn't interrupt you when, the 8, 9, 10 minutes being over, because what you're saying is so important. I have, couldn't agree more with everything you said, but something that I probably share with my own personal experience to everyone here. There's absolutely, I don't think, any doubt in anyone's mind about the rationale and the benefits that would accrue from the AfCFTA. That's absolutely, and you highlighted it so beautifully. The only thing, we must not forget that for those benefits to accrue, for those, people to be lifted out of poverty, for the kind of economic growth-led development, there's so many small cogs have to all go into the wheel, and we miss a few. We miss the boat, and we mustn't do it, because for many of us who worked in trade for many years, when the Doha Round was being signed in 1995, the statistics for the benefits that would accrue to developing countries is huge. How much benefits would accrue, but finally, when you look back 20 years down the line, which I'm sure many of us will do in our old age when we look back at the implementation of the AfCFTA, we want to be very happy that that's what it led. So, but really, thanks a ton. Thanks a ton for that. I have the pleasure of now requesting Mr. Bohani. He is the Managing Director and the Group Head of Sales, Trade and Working Capital of the ABSA Group. Now, what is very important is that in the past, last 30 minutes, most of what we've talked of has that underlying importance of the need to finance various aspects of the implementation of the AfCFTA. And if you are looking at the words trade finance, working capital, business development, or transactional banking, etc., then probably no better person than Mr. Bohani to lead us on to that discussion. He's actually very much an expert in exactly this. So Bohani, over to you. Happy to listen to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think first and foremost, my greetings to all government officials and all officials from the private sector. that we have today with us. It's a great pleasure for myself, on behalf of our organization as well, the APSA Group, to come and talk in this session today. I think I just want to spend a few minutes trying to connect a few things that we have been already talked about a little bit by our panelists. So just in summary, the AfCFTA brings together the 1.2 billion Africans with a $3.4 trillion economy into an operationalized one market. And I'm calling it an operationalized one market because of the critical part of the AfCFTA, which is the applicable free tariffs on 90% of goods and services traded within the continent. So it's important to just say that is the first thing. So right from the word go, you are now talking of a single market that allows entities engaging with Africa to engage not with a $20 billion economy there and a $30 billion economy there, or a $100 billion economy there, but with a $3.4 trillion economy. So I think that's a very important point. And I thought what I'll do is to try and structure my talk around what benefits do I see or do we see in terms of corporates. And I'm saying that as well in line with what I spend a lot of my life and a lot of my time doing, which is talking and looking at various ways to finance trade that is happening in Africa. And I therefore want to point out areas of opportunities in both trade and investment that we see. The first thing I want to highlight is that I think various studies, including one by the World Bank, does indicate the fact that there is a $100 billion infrastructure deficit per year over the next 10 years, which translates into $1 trillion. You can look at it and see a challenge, but equally, that's an opportunity. And that infrastructure deficit is across multiple kinds of infrastructure. Of course, starting with the physical infrastructure in terms of roads and rail, ports and all of that, as well as digital infrastructure. It's a critical enabler of the free trade area. Now, it's important, therefore, sitting outside of the African continent to see that there is continued, as we see it, engagement between the private sector and the public sector in driving investment in this infrastructure. So that is the first area of opportunity that I want to highlight, that sitting outside of the continent or companies that engage with Africa, there is this great opportunity that exists. And I think a lot of the work that we do ourselves, and I'll quote a few names here because we do some work, and I was just talking to a colleague of mine about some of the work we do with the Africa Exim Bank, as well as the AFDB, the IFC, and multiple other stakeholders. So it's an important aspect to say that there is this opportunity that exists in terms of that. The second aspect I want to relate in as far as corporates are concerned is what I would say has been largely in a way even made much more clear on the back of COVID. I think part of Africa's experience, and as far as COVID is concerned, was at first, of course, shortages of PPEs, and then, of course, the vaccine situation. I think what that has done is to, more than any other time, show the opportunity that exists in terms of the creation of regional value chains across multiple sectors in the continent, ranging from pharmaceuticals to electrification to beneficiation of minerals and so forth. And I think I had the honorable, minister speaking earlier and talking about the need to diversify Africa's exports. And I think part of that and what we're seeing as an opportunity that is now created by the AfCFTA, it's the creation of these regional value chains that ordinarily would not have been possible for a whole lot of other reasons. But I think the very fact that two critical parts of the free trade area for me would be in place. One is the application of zero tariffs. Two, it's having, and there's a lot of progress in that space, having resolved the question of rules of origin, it then gives an impetus into both the African corporates, but as well as corporates elsewhere outside of the continent to consider setting up shop to make sure that they can be drivers of these regional value chains that we're talking about. And I think here it's worth mentioning as well that I think part of the implications of the COVID experience has been, of course, both the localization as well as the regionalization of value chains and supply chains. And I think us as bankers, have engaged a lot with our customers who are seeking to shift some of these supply chains from certain parts in the world back into the African continent. And I think if you are operating in India or if you are an India conglomerate, I think there's a lot of opportunities there for you. The third and the last aspect I want to raise as an opportunity, once again, for corporates that are operating outside of the continent, is the fact that practically what this means, as we said, is that if you think about how you're operating with Africa today, which involves, let's say, 54 sets of different tariffs when you are domiciled in Africa. So if you've got a treasury function that sits in Nairobi, or that sits in Johannesburg, South Africa, or that sits in Accra, essentially part of your challenge is how you then aggregate your treasury functions across all these multiple countries, dealing with, for example, 54 tariff regimes, as well as if you are having a manufacturing capability or capacity and a distribution capacity in any of these spaces, how you then move the goods across the various countries. And what we're saying now is that with the free trade area, it now gives an opportunity for better management of your procurement services or your distribution services, as well as your treasury management services, because of the applicable zero tariffs that will be on 90% of the goods within the next 5 years for the developing countries, and I think within the next 7 years for the least developed countries. Now, in closure, what we see, therefore, is these kinds of opportunities. And from a banking perspective, from a financing perspective, we are looking at all of these developments and trying to make sure that the $100 billion trade finance gap, it's getting dealt with on a day-by-day basis by ensuring that we are looking at the ways we actually finance trade, because I think we all know the blood of the lifeblood of the regional economy is trade, and more so in Africa. There is a projection that we can grow intra-Africa trade from the current levels of 18 to 20% by about 52% over the next few years, translating into a GDP growth annually, GDP shift of about $450 billion by 2030. So I think this is very important for the African continent, and not only, in my view, is it the biggest game changer for the continent, it's actually, importantly as well, creating opportunities for conglomerates, for Indian companies, for companies all over the world to make sure that they can take advantage of these opportunities that I've already spoken to and set up shop in the continent and make sure that they are drivers together with the African continent of the next phase of Africa's regional economic development. Thank you very much, and I'll stop there.
Bwani, thank you so much. Thanks a lot. And I think that's such a clear and lucid message to Indian industry that there's lots of opportunities out there. And thank you also for talking about the duty-free regime and the zero tariffs, because that is at least a partial answer to, I think, a very important question that Ambassador Srinivas, the Indian ambassador from Dakar, had raised at the beginning. For my panelists and the others who are logged on through this link, I must tell you, I've just received information from the CII colleagues managing it, that there are over 200 people logged in other forums too, throughout the CII Hive and YouTube. So you have a lot of people following you, which also means that you may have a lot of questions. So we'll try and still keep to our time of 7 p.m. But if case we do run over, then I would request the panelists just to stay on for a little while longer. I now have the pleasure of, I'm always at a loss of words what to say. He's a colleague, he's a friend, he's a person I've learned a great deal from, Professor Sachin Chaturvedi. He is, I've often said this in his presence, that if I were to say all that I want to say about him, it could probably take, quite some time. But he is the Director General of the Research and Information Systems for Developing Country. He's probably the lead, or not the leading, think tank in this area. But knowing Sachin for a long time, there are a few words which describe his work. South-South cooperation. He's done immensely great work, and that's exactly what this would be. Developmental economics, the SDGs, and as you heard him say, he's also on the board of the Reserve Bank of India, which is, I think, a reflection of his, financial policy acumen. But what I think best describes him is that he's probably the foremost commentator on India's external sector economic engagement and partnership. So you think of India across the border economically, and you will think of Sachin. He's a professor, so he speaks very well, and I think that's reason enough for me not to say more, but to hand the floor over to you, Sachin. So look forward to listening.
Thank you. Thanks for such a generous introduction. Thanks a lot. I think the stage is already set with excellent and very profound remarks by Mr. Reddy, which has covered the large spectrum of issues which we are discussing today. And I think Albert has further added the gravitas to our discussion. And Chair's own remarks in the beginning have captured the full landscape 360 degrees view. Of course, we are here to elaborate parts of it, but I think stage is all set. And we are set for a very rich partnership between India and Africa. I would just have 3 points to raise, and I would be very brief. And as we heard everyone, we are talking about AfCFTA, which is one of the world's largest FTA in terms of the geographic area and also in terms of the size, with more than 1.3 billion people that would be covered, with $3.4 trillion estimations that are already available. The idea and the objective is definitely in terms of addressing and streamlining 90% of the tariff lines. It is trying to address in the medium term on IPR and competition policy, and gradually on the institutional framework. So I think it sets in the large canvas quite well, as many developing countries, and as Chair rightly emphasized on South-South cooperation in the beginning, as a sort of precursor to several of the growth strategies. And I think Albert was right in terms of how COVID has affected. It has, in a way, adversely affected not only the fiscal space, but also the space which private sector has been enjoying in terms of finance. Given the kind of provisions AfCFTA has proposed for LDCs, 3% tariff lines have been kept outside, but huge coverage is there. If you leave aside 7% of tariff lines, 10-year phase out has been proposed, and 90% tariff lines are covered. In case of non-LDCs, it is for 5 years, and sensitive areas that are left are still 7%. So you see a huge differentiation that has been made, and I think that is important for taking forward India-Africa partnership that we are trying to address. The first point that I want to make in this backdrop, and I think Mr. Reddy very rightly said in terms of how we are going to go forward. And for me, I think investment is the best strategy as we also focus on trade. And I think it was very rightly mentioned just now. Between last 10 years, from 11 to 21, we see a rise in Indian investment to somewhere close to $62 billion. And that investment is spread across. Several projects have been made, and in one of the earlier CII conclaves, we in a way dealt with one panel where chair again was Mr. Priyadarshi, where we had covered the idea of the CETA project. And as you would recall, the idea was in terms of trade capacities, and we need to see how at the micro level GOI and LOCs can be combined, and we need to, of course, revisit the idea of lines of credit. Today, there is no time to get into that discussion, but I think we need consultation, we need discussion, and we need to see the new avatar that LOCs have to evolve with. And I think Mr. Reddy has also captured the nature of composition of our trade. So the primary commodities coming in and manufactured products going in, I think that's the kind of trade balance we are seeing. He also very rightly mentioned about the focus, and that's where my first point comes in, is about the banking and finance. And I think it's absolutely important for us to see how limited is our coverage. And in last 5 years, we have further reduced the number of Indian bank branches in Africa. Like for instance, in Kenya, we have only 5, Mauritius 9, Botswana 2, Uganda 1, South Africa 1, Tanzania 1. There are some joint ventures. So in Zambia, our Bank of Baroda has one joint venture, and in Nigeria there is one. So you see a very lopsided coverage when it comes to banking and finance coverage. Similarly, as again Mr. Reddy had mentioned about the Export Credit Guarantee Corporation, and that's the second point that I want to cover, is the cost of insurance. And if traders are not given a comforting space there, and incidentally, a couple of years back when I was working with my research team on Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, we had paid a lot of attention in terms of how some of the Indian institutions can play an important role. And at that point, ECGC had signed an agreement with the Nippon Export and Investment Insurance Agency, NEXI. And the idea was to give fillip to this sector, bring down the cost, and the effort was in that direction. I think more studies are required because MEGA, the multilateral investment arm of the World Bank, the cost is still very high. The private insurances that are available, they are equally expensive. So we need to see how we can go ahead with. In fact, ECGC also tried, as I recall, investing in the African Trade Investment Agency. I think some 10 or $20 million were invested for the Indian companies to take advantage and also facilitate two-way trade. But we need to work out these details further for reducing the transaction cost, facilitating the banking and financial infrastructure to come in. My third point is more in terms of how trade facilitation would help. And this is where we need to learn lessons from many other countries who have dominated South-South trade in last decade or so. And that has happened largely because very efficient ports and dedicated sea lanes. In India, Prime Minister Modi has launched the Sagarmala project. 41 ports are coming around, and they are coming up with dedicated facilities. With the India-Japan partnership, we are trying to do that at the Mombasa port in Kenya. I think more efforts are required for trade facilitation, and that would reduce the transaction cost. So one is the financial part of the transaction cost. The other is the product finalization. And as was very rightly mentioned earlier, the value chains that have to come up, the product fragmentation at various levels that would happen, I think would require very focused attention for private sector to come in. India has recently come out with the Blue Economy draft policy. My institute had a very important role in drafting of it. And this policy envisages India-Africa partnership through oceans deepening up at the Indian Ocean Rim Association and at many other dimensions that are needed for focusing on some of these areas. So with these 3 points, I think the AfCFTA advantage is a great opportunity for India. Unfortunately, asymmetry of information continues to be one big area of concern. And I think it is very important that we address with CII. RIS has partnered to do detailed analysis of AfCFTA. Our teams are still on the drawing board, and we are trying to get out in terms of how some of the key areas can be addressed. And the Secretariat of the AfCFTA, we are in close touch with them, trying to get further details. But I think it is important if more information flow is there for meaningful analysis and opportunity for far more deeper and longer conversations. Joint research probably would be the way forward. And since Albert is here, I can mention in terms of how important World Bank role would be in facilitating some of these linkages. With World Bank, I think some of the dimensions that Japan has come up with would be extremely important. So Chair, thanks for the opportunity. I would stop here. I'm still saving 2 minutes for you. Thank you.
Sachin, brilliant as always. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. While there are many points of yours I could pick up, but really, the one thing which you and I have both spoken about in previous CII Exim Bank enclaves is the importance of business information. And I think, the way the AfCFTA will be put in place over the next few months and the information emerging from that will be key to a large number of policy and investment decisions that companies take. And I'm sure that now that you're in touch with Albert and perhaps including us, I mean, it's still early for the AfCFTA to start sending notifications to the WTO. It will happen. Obviously, then that information will be available to all. But I think there's a lot of other business information that joint research of the kind you said will be great. So thanks, Adan, Sachin. Thanks, Adan. Saurabh, thank you for your patience. You were billed as the second last speaker, but I have the now pleasure to also tell you that you'll have the last word because we are missing Dr. Anil Sukal. So I'll be handing over to you, Saurabh, as the final speaker of this panel. Ladies and gentlemen, Saurabh is, in fact, very well qualified for the last word because he leads the technical industrial advisory practice of the CBRE Industrial Group. He's actually the executive director there. And importantly, his work, the industrial advisory assignments are spread across a large number of countries that are spread out over Africa, that Africa trades with. So they go beyond the ambit of Africa, India, but because Africa is trading with them, I think they are as important. And importantly, he's worked both with the private sector and with a large number of governments. So Saurav, over to you.
Thank you, Shishir, for the introduction, and good evening to all the viewers joining, and I hope everybody is staying really safe. I want to start off by thanking the other panelists in terms of their opinions. They've talked about AfCFTA, they've talked about how AfCFTA can be the engine of growth for Africa, and also in terms of the delta, in terms of the trade which AfCFTA can bring in. And these are all viable ideas, we feel, in my opinion. But really, from my perspective, for the AfCFTA to be really successful, a lot of the underlying factors really in Africa, which determine manufacturing efficiency in a country or a continent, must be developed. And that must be developed as a part of the AfCFTA implementation framework. So we're not just talking about a policy of AfCFTA, but we are talking about dealing with those factors of production, in my opinion, which will make trading and the business community and the tenants successful in that market itself. I'll talk about some on-ground measures, primarily, which we've witnessed from our experience perspective in CBRE. And, we've been advising, governments, developers, etc., over the last decade in Africa. We've advised them to set up special economic zones. We've advised them to set up large economic corridors. We've also advised very large anchor tenants on the electronic side, pharmaceutical side, oil and gas side, petrochemical side, to move into new geographies. And always, there are these 5 or 6 crucial recurring themes which are most important for traders and manufacturing companies who want to enter the African market, and it has to be successfully be provided to them. And they are looking at it either from a domestic market perspective of the entire Africa, or as an export-driven market per se. So probably, my talk will be a little bit different and talk more on challenges rather than in the opportunities which are there. And it's important to understand the challenges, because I think as we move into the AfCFTA perspective, the challenges will come up more than the opportunities. So the first thing which comes to my mind essentially is the importance of location. It's important to understand location from 2 perspectives. One is from the perspective of the Indian manufacturer who's going to enter Africa. And it's also important to understand location from the perspective of which African countries would be the beachheads under which trade and manufacturing will flourish in Africa under the AfCFTA, and how they will collaborate with the smaller African nations. I think that's a very, very important factor as we move forward and develop a lot of businesses under AfCFTA. So, whether it's a company choosing West Africa as its base, whether they should move into Nigeria, to look at all the countries in West Africa as their major consumer markets, whether they should move into East Africa, whether, Kenya or Ethiopia is that beachhead, or, whether they want to move into South Africa. So this basket of questions in terms of which area, which location should we move into, I think is going to be a key decision maker in terms of success under AfCFTA. And automatically, that brings me to the second factor, which is the sector. And Mr. Reddy has talked about it, Albert has talked about it. It's important to understand, primarily from the Indian businesses perspective, what sectors should they move into? What sectors should they trade in? Should they be looking at raw material dependent sectors such as metals and mining, oil and gas, petrochemicals, or plastics, where they can do primarily primary, secondary, or tertiary processing? Or, they can send it out as exports to other markets per se. The second point important to understand also is whether they should look at consumer-oriented industries, which give them that large focus of the African population, be it, food or agro-processing or pharmaceuticals or machinery. That's a decision which needs to be made very strongly. Or from an Indian perspective, it's also important to understand the success we've had on the services side, on the information technology side, on the knowledge outsourcing side, on the tourism side, on the hospitality side. So as I said, location is an important factor, but dovetailed into the location, obviously, are the sectors, various, Indian businesses should choose in order to be successful in Africa. The third thing which repeatedly has come up, in the work we've done across the last decade is questions on industrial environment. When I talk about industrial environment, I mean development of a favorable and a viable business environment for manufacturing. I talk about, the factors of production which are so important for large conglomerates to do trading or manufacturing in Africa. Some of these factors we take for granted in Europe, in Asia, and even sometimes in India today. But, in Africa, sometimes, these are absent. And to make AfCFTA possible on ground, each one of the countries have to focus on that. What are they? Simple things like good quality, contiguous, clean ownership land parcel. Land is a major issue for, industries to set up. Provision of high quality standard power or gas connections. Sometimes in Africa, in certain countries, this is not available itself. Water purification systems, treated water for pharmaceutical industries. This also is something which is sometimes not available. So within the ambit of the AfCFTA network, one needs to think about how I'm going to provide all of these things to the companies which come in. And ultimately, all these factors of production reduce operating costs and therefore reduces cost of operation, ultimately benefiting whom? Benefiting the African consumers. So it's important to understand, really, to make AfCFTA more than just an idealistic policy, whether we will look at developing an industrial zone policy in Africa, whether that can be a subset of the overall AfCFTA network. For example, somewhat like the Chinese Special Economic Zone policy, or even the Indian Domestic Tariff Area program. So these are important considerations to make to understand, under the ambit of AfCFTA on ground, what are the factors which will make business successful. And that leads me to my next part of the focus of my speech, essentially, is involvement of international private partners. When you develop, industrial zones or infrastructure zones or economic corridors, you need to bring in companies like a Mitsubishi, a Marubeni, a Sumitomo, a DP World, a Mahindra or a GMR, who essentially are developing these industrial zones across various countries. And therefore, under AfCFTA network, you need to have the ability to go for a government-to-government collaboration for bringing in master developers. Under this ambit, there needs to be a clear public-private partnership policy where you have to bring in these master developers, give them land, maybe sovereign guarantees also in terms of providing them infrastructure. And related to this point also is incentives and regulations. We've often felt in most of the companies whom we've worked with in Africa that they have a fear of their capital being eroded in Africa. So question is, under the AfCFTA network, are we really looking at protection of capital for the foreign investors? Are nations giving them a sovereign guarantee in terms of capital protection? Is the foreign investor being safe, or are they feeling safe in terms of repatriation of that capital? These are things which we need to think about. Also, in terms of promotion, each African nation promotes itself as one specific nation to another nation. But probably we need to have a larger Pan-Africa investment promotion agency, maybe, which will look at an Africa platform with an Asia platform rather than a country-to-country kind of a perspective. And also, sector-specific incentives. For example, a lot of MSMEs will want from India to move into Africa. How do we reduce their capex? How do we reduce, for them to spend so much on their initial capital? How do they come to the market fast by providing them plug and play infrastructure in terms of light manufacturing units, in terms of standard design factories, not just land. We need to provide more than land to these various companies which are wanting to come in. And obviously, a lot has been talked about, FTAs, because a lot of the countries whom we've worked with don't just come into Africa for intra-Africa trade. They look at it as a base for exports. That's why it's very, very important for looking at a cross-platform Africa-level FTA, not just with India, but with other areas where most of the markets exist. And The final 2 points of mine, I'm aware we are crossing 7 o'clock, I believe, but essentially, one is, local partner. And I stress on this very, very strongly. Africa is not the same as Europe and America, as developed processes. It's not the same as China or Thailand or Vietnam as India. We need to make sure that each nation under AfCFTA offers a good collaboration partner. So for when Indian businesses move to Africa, will they be able to find a partner in Africa, an African company whom they will collaborate with? They will give them advice on how to work in Africa, how to operationalize in the continent, how to get approvals, how to get permits, and generally advise on local issues. These are very, very important things which get lost overall from the policy perspective. But on ground, these are things which a company will want and make their decisions on. And finally, I think a very important part is connectivity. We take a lot of things for granted. If you look at trade in Europe, mostly it happens through road and rail. In India, 60% of the goods run through road. We have a very good road network, but in Africa, it's a challenge. Sometimes there are pilferage issues. Sometimes roads are not existing in certain cases. Railways also are sometimes very, very existing in an absent manner. So it's important to understand that the development of ports are going to be very, very important under AfCFTA, because it is the ports which are going to be the beachheads along which a lot of the investment will happen, industrial zones will happen, a lot of the trade which will move in, even intra-Africa, will be through ports. So there has
même au sein de l'Afrique même, pour les... il faut avoir...
Sorry. So I'll just conclude. I think we are running out of time. So I think all of those points which I have touched across, including ports, are going to be very important. And I think as a summary, or as a conclusion, I will leave you with an example of a company which has been very successful in moving into Africa. The company is Tolaram, and it's essentially from Singapore. And they have moved into Africa over the past 2 decades. And today, under the Indomie brand, they have one of the largest food companies in Africa today. It's a case study which is quoted in Harvard. And today in Nigeria, they are setting up a free zone as well as a port. But I think for the audience listening in, I think it's very important that they study the way Tolaram has been successful and try to emulate some part of it. So that's all from my side, Shishir. It's been a great pleasure attending this, and all the best to everyone.
Saurabh, thank you so much. In fact, you've actually done 2 great things. One, you got a lot of us people who work more in policy, focus so much of what is required and needs to be done at ground. So that's really brilliant because, as I say in the context of WTO, governments don't trade. It is companies and people who trade. So thank you so much for that. And also, in a way, I would have loved to, perhaps maybe not as eloquently as you, but perhaps love to conclude with some of those points exactly. But I'll just add one thing. It's exactly what you said, but from a different perspective. You said that when companies, let's say, for instance, in India, are looking for to benefit from the AfCFTA or go into Africa, then a lot of decisions will have to be taken. Your use of the word beachhead is amazing, right? Location, sector, the factors of production. Again, I thought very, very important points. But 2 representatives of Indian industry moving now to people from Africa who are tuned in. I think hopefully there will be a very positive competitive element even within the African countries, because you also want to attract FDI, and why should it go to A and why not B? And therefore, some of the points you mentioned, I think, should actually resonate on the other side, that if these are the kind of things you're looking for, then that's what we are willing to give. And I'll add only one point, and really that's important. You've talked of all of them, the time frame. People must also go in with a medium-term time frame. You should be there for sustainability. You should be there for ensuring not for a quick in and out of it. And if you have things like capital protection, or you said there and, or economic zones, then that's well covered. So really, thanks a ton. Thanks, brilliantly done. Listen, this is obviously outstanding. 75 minutes, I had initially thought would be adequate. I was wrong. The richness of the discussion, we could have probably gone on for another half an hour. I have some concluding remarks. I will not at least share them now. I'd rather that if there were any questions, what you can see on your chat box is only from the limited people who are tuned in here. And I'll probably take the help of Paridhi or someone else in CII in case there were any questions from people, linked through any other channel. So we'll just wait to see if there are any questions, if anyone takes the floor, including obviously with anyone who's logged into the Zoom link too. So please, any member of, any of the participants, any of the people logged in, I'll give it, a few, or maybe half a minute or so just to see that. But then, just as a forewarning, Shrikar, I'd very much like you to perhaps, have a few concluding remarks, if you so desire, based on what you've heard. And then I can come in with a few thoughts. I, at least at the moment, don't see a question, so we'll wait for that. But Shrikar, happy to give you the floor in case you want to add on to any of the things that you said or others.
Well, thank you, sir. I have nothing much to add. Like we have noted some of the suggestions made by other speakers, especially regarding how to invest in using the African free trade area. But also, like Professor Sachin Chaturvedi also mentioned about the reduction of the transaction cost. So we are also, in fact, working with our ECGC corporation. So we will try to see how we can reduce the transaction cost.
Fine. Perfect. Listen, then what I'll do is I'll just make two very brief points. Slightly, perhaps we've not touched upon them, but I think, yes. And I've also got a message that we've been advised, perhaps for interpretation reasons, to wind up the session in the next few minutes. Allows me to really say, look, we've talked of, especially in the context of Africa, the opportunities that AfCFTA would provide to them. Now, for many of us who worked in areas where structural changes have been brought about, quite often there are some sectors of society which actually also see a negative impact. And I'm not saying that there will be a negative impact, but I really want to put a pointer in this very rich discussion on the gender aspect. Very often we assume trade to be gender neutral, and genuinely, I would so much prefer if trade was, at least to some extent, gender biased in favor. So let's be, in whatever planning we do, whatever policy measures we put in place, whatever assistance we provide, let's be mindful of the impact on women, because very often it's that off-grid model which involve women as key players in the value chain. And women, and at times along, young entrepreneurs, they face greater barriers in accessing trade and could possibly be marginalized. And I say this with some basis. Every second year, we conduct Aid for Trade monitoring and evaluation exercise, and we send out a questionnaire. And the last one we did was in 2019. And it indicated, amongst the responses from the countries, that women and young people are often the groups that are perhaps marginalized. So I would strongly want to urge that India and Africa set an example in gender mainstreaming, at all levels. And my final point is, Aid for Trade is an initiative that has been globally now accepted. It's been led by the WTO. It's been there since 2005, and we've seen a phenomenal amount of aid and assistance, both through regional banks and international banks, flow into Africa. For the next biennial planning, I think as far as Africa is concerned, the Aid for Trade projects must reflect the AfCFTA priorities. Many have been mentioned here. I've taken note of them. I will pass them on. But, it's ports, it's rails, it's roads, it's connectivity, as was just mentioned, it's linking up the markets. Everything which is required to bring countries into a mutually, profitable free trade area. So maybe just these 2 points that I'll add. But with that, I must genuinely say, if it's been enriching, and I felt that myself, I'm sure it's been for the participants too. So thank you so much, Dr. Reddy, and thank you so much to all the esteemed panelists. It's been wonderful. Thank you for taking our time. And obviously, thank you to CII and the Exim Bank for this conclave. So with all that, all my best wishes and good luck.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you,
Shishir. Panelists. Thank you for your.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Thanks again. Thanks.